The morning air at Fort Dunmere clung to the skin like a damp cloth, heavy with the kind of humidity that made every breath feel like sipping soup. The sun was just cresting over the cypress trees, painting long, jagged shadows across the gravel lot where soldiers shuffled toward their morning formations. The cadence of their boots mixed with the distant hum of diesel engines warming up in the motor pool, a rhythm as familiar to this place as a heartbeat. Fort Dunmere, nestled deep in the Louisiana lowlands, was home to the 7th Armored Brigade, its weathered brick buildings and peeling green signs testifying to decades of hard use. Everything here was practical, functional, painted in that muted shade of military gray that seemed to absorb light and hope in equal measure. The base thrummed with the restless energy of a Monday morning. Weekend passes had expired, and the grind of routine was settling back in like an unwelcome guest. The air carried the sharp tang of diesel fuel, the faint sweetness of magnolia blossoms, and the ever-present bitterness of overbrewed coffee wafting from the mess hall. It was just another day at a base where predictability was gospel, and anything or anyone out of place stood out like a flare in the night. No one noticed the woman stepping out of a dusty Chevy pickup, parked near the supply depot's entrance. Mara Kellen moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd navigated bases like this for decades. At 55, her dark hair, streaked with silver, was pulled into a tight bun that screamed regulation, even though she'd left active duty years ago. Her gait carried a slight limp, a souvenir from a night in Helmand when the earth had erupted beneath her. She'd been a civilian for nearly a decade, but the army never really left her. It lingered in the way she scanned doorways, the way she woke at 04:30 without a clock, the way her civilian wardrobe was folded with a precision that would have passed any drill sergeant's inspection. A faint scar curved along her jawline, barely noticeable unless the light hit it just right, a remnant of a close call with a mortar round. Most people didn't see it. Those who did rarely asked. Her jacket drew the stares. It was an old field coat, its olive drab faded to a ghostly green from years under relentless sun. The cuffs were frayed, threads unraveling like they'd fought their own battles. The shoulder bore a patch so worn it was nearly invisible, just a whisper of stitching that might have been a crescent or a claw, or nothing at all. It wasn't a patch you'd find in any manual or surplus store. Around her neck hung a lanyard from another era, the kind with a paper ID and a cracked plastic sleeve, long replaced by smart cards and biometrics. She wasn't here to make a point. The jacket was just what she'd pulled from her closet for a weekend training gig, a favor for an old friend who needed a civilian volunteer with logistics experience. No pay, just meals, and a chance to keep busy. Mara didn't need the recognition. She just needed to move. The supply depot was a hive of activity, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry insects. The air smelled of canvas, cardboard, and the faint chemical bite of floor cleaner. Rows of shelves loomed with neatly stacked gear. MREs, folded tarps, crates of ammo. Mara clutched a clipboard with a simple list. Size 7.5 boots, hydration pack, work gloves, a roll of duct tape, basic gear, the kind that kept soldiers alive without making the evening news. Behind the counter, a young private named Dorsey wrestled with a computer that seemed to hate him as much as he feared it. His fingers hesitated over the keys, like he was defusing a bomb. Nearby, two specialists debated the merits of composite toe boots with the fervor of philosophers. Then she heard them. 3 first lieutenants lounged near a rack of uniforms, their crisp fatigues and polished insignia screaming fresh commission. They had the swagger of new officers, the kind who'd memorized the field manual but hadn't yet met the real world. The tallest, name-tape-reading Calder had the broad shoulders of a former wrestler, his confidence bordering on arrogance. He nudged his friend, a wiry officer named Pratt, whose posture suggested he was still proving himself to someone. The third, a lieutenant named Vesco, fidgeted with a pen, his nervous energy spilling into every word. "Check out that coat," Calder said, loud enough to carry but soft enough to feign discretion. "Looks like it survived a thrift store apocalypse." Pratt smirked, leaning closer. "Bet she dug it out of her uncle's garage. You know the type. Wears old gear. Spins tales about secret missions." Vesco chimed in, his voice sharp with mockery. "Probably tells everyone at the bar she was Delta Force. Fake patches, fake stories, the whole wannabe package." Their laughter was low, practiced, the kind that thrived on cutting down someone who couldn't hit back. Mara didn't flinch. She moved down the aisle, grabbing gloves and a hydration pack, her movements precise, unhurried. She'd heard worse. The private at the counter, Dorsey, glanced up as she approached. "Morning, ma'am," he said, trying to sound official. "Got your paperwork?" She handed over a neatly folded authorization letter, 4 pages, signed by a logistics major, stamped with enough official seals to sink a ship. Dorsey read it, flipped it over, then frowned at his screen. System saying you need an active duty code or unit clearance. I can't override it." He looked apologetic, like he was failing a test he didn't know he was taking. "Might need my supervisor, but he's in a meeting." Calder sauntered over, his grin all teeth and no warmth. "Let me see that," he said, snatching the letter like he was doing her a favor. He held it up, squinting theatrically. "Looks legit, but anyone with a printer can fake this stuff. We get folks trying to pull this all the time. Expired IDs, forged forms." He handed it back with a shrug. "Better come back after 0900 when the office opens." Dorsey shifted, caught between protocol and pressure. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but—" Mara nodded once. No argument, no fuss. She stepped aside, settling onto a hard metal bench by the wall, her gear list resting on her knee. The bench was cold, unforgiving. The kind of furniture designed to make you regret sitting. But she'd waited in worse places. Foxholes, medevac choppers, debriefing rooms that smelled of fear and lies. She adjusted her jacket, the faded patch catching the light for a moment. A civilian contractor pushing a cart of water jugs paused, his eyes locking on the patch. His face flickered with something. Recognition, maybe, or disbelief. Before he turned and hurried into the back, his steps too quick for routine. The lieutenants had found an audience now. A small knot of junior officers and a warrant officer named Gaines gathered near the vending machines. Pratt was in his element, one boot propped on a chair like he was delivering a sermon. "She's probably got a whole closet of that junk," he said, gesturing with a soda can. "Fake medals, made-up missions. Bet she's got a story about raiding bin Laden's summer home." Gaines, older and weathered, shook his head with mock pity. "They always have some scar to flash, some vague tale about classified ops. That patch? Doesn't even exist in the system. Probably sewed it on herself." The laughter came easy, safe in the knowledge that rank shielded them. They were punching down, and it felt good, until a coffee tray hit the table behind them with a deliberate clink. 4 mugs, steam curling in the air. No one had heard him approach. The man stood like a statue carved from granite, his fatigues worn but clean, sleeves rolled to reveal tattoos that told stories these officers couldn't begin to read. A ranger tab, a trident, deployment band stacked like a history lesson. His name tape read Harlan. Below it, in stark letters, Brig Gen. The laughter died instantly, like a candle snuffed out. Brigadier General Elias Harlan didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their existence. He picked up a 5th coffee, black and steaming, and walked toward the bench where Mara sat, his boots silent on the concrete floor. The supply depot's hum continued, but the air had shifted, grown heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. General Elias Harlan moved with the kind of purpose that made people step aside without being told. His shadow fell across Mara Kellen's shoulders as he stopped a few feet behind her, coffee mug still in hand. She didn't turn, but her posture tightened ever so slightly, like a wire pulled taut. The faded patch on her jacket caught the fluorescent light, its ghosted outline barely discernible, a crescent maybe, or something sharper. It wasn't a patch you'd find in any catalog, not one taught in officer training or displayed in a base museum. "That patch," Harlan said, his voice low but carrying the weight of command, the kind that cut through noise without effort. "Where'd you serve with the Fort on 12th Shade?" The words landed like a stone in still water. Mara's spine straightened, but she kept her eyes forward, her hands resting calmly on her gear list. The question wasn't just curiosity. It was a key turning in a lock most people didn't even know existed. "Began with them on Night Vale," she said quietly, her voice steady, precise. "Ended on Iron Hollow." The names meant nothing to the lieutenant still frozen near the vending machines, their earlier bravado evaporating like sweat in the depot's chilly air. Night Vale, Iron Hollow. They sounded like code words from a war game, abstract and meaningless to anyone who hadn't been there. But to Harlan, they were markers on a map drawn in dust and blood, coordinates of missions that never made it to public record. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath the weathered skin. He stepped around to face her now, his eyes locking on the faded patch, studying it like a historian deciphering a lost script. "Shade Company didn't have a roster," he said, his tone softening, almost reverent. "Most folks at CENTCOM swear it never existed." Mara met his gaze, her dark eyes steady, measuring him as if gauging the distance to a target. "It existed for 6 years," she said simply. "Then some of us got reassigned to ghost units. The rest were told to forget." A silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy, the kind that carried the weight of things left unsaid, of reports that never saw daylight. The depot's usual clatter, forklifts beeping, boots scuffing, keyboards clicking, faded into a hush. Even the private behind the counter, Dorsey, stopped fumbling with his scanner, his hands hovering over the keys as if afraid to break the moment. "Iron Hollow," Harlan said, almost to himself, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "March 2009. They called it Operation Dust Echo in the open files. That wasn't the real name." "No," Mara replied, her tone matching his. "It wasn't." Harlan turned, his gaze sweeping the depot like a searchlight. "I need the officer in charge of this facility. Now." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried the authority of someone who'd given orders under fire, who'd made decisions that tipped the balance between life and death. The private scanner hit the floor with a plastic clatter. The lieutenants, Calder, Pratt, and Vesco, stood rigid, their eyes suddenly fascinated by the scuffed concrete at their feet. One of them, Vesco, muttered under his breath, "Shade Company?" But no one answered. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. A master sergeant emerged from the back office, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd heard that tone before and knew it meant business. He was broad-shouldered, his face lined with years of wrangling logistics and soldiers alike. His name tape read Tolliver. He didn't salute. Harlan wasn't the type to demand it in a setting like this, but his posture said he understood the weight of the moment. "General," Tolliver said, his voice clipped but respectful. "What's the situation?" Harlan didn't waste words. "This is Sergeant First Class Mara Kellen. She served with the 412th Shade Company under Joint Special Operations, Night Vale, and Iron Hollow." He paused, letting the words sink in. Tolliver's eyes flicked to Mara's shoulder, to the patch that was more shadow than substance. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition of her, but of a legend whispered in secure briefings, a unit that existed only in redacted lines and rumors. "That unit ran Black Protocol," Harlan continued, his voice carrying across the silent depot. "No records, no press, complete deniability. But I know it existed because on March 12, 2009, outside Lashkar, when my team was pinned down in a valley with no air support, Shade Company ran a diversion through the Eastern Pass. His words were steady, but there was an undercurrent, something personal. We were escorting a medevac convoy, 2 vehicles, 43 personnel, half of them wounded. Insurgents had us locked in from the ridges. No way out. Shade went in without clearance, without backup. They drew fire, gave us the window to get our people to the LZ. Tolliver straightened, his gaze shifting to Mara with new respect. Understood, sir. She's got full cooperation. Whatever she needs, gear, access, anything. No questions asked. That's a direct order. Harlan nodded once, sharp and final. Then louder, to the room. Consider that a standing directive. The lieutenants didn't move, didn't speak. Calder's earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a tightness around his mouth. Pratt stared at his soda can like it held the answers to his sudden discomfort. Vesco's pen had stopped twitching, his hands clasped behind his back. The depot resumed its rhythm, but it was different now, subdued, as if everyone felt the weight of what had just been said. Mara hadn't spoken through it all. She sat still, her gear list folded neatly on her knee, but something in her bearing had shifted. Not triumph, not vindication, just a quiet release, like a knot loosening after years of being pulled tight. Harlan set his coffee mug on the counter and gestured for her to follow. The private, Dorsey, snapped to attention, his earlier hesitation replaced by a frantic need to do something right. "Ma'am, I'll get your gear processed now," he said, fingers flying across the keyboard, overriding codes without a second glance. An aide appeared from the back, carrying a sealed gear bag. Boots, hydration pack, gloves, all regulation, all pristine. Harlan placed it on the counter beside Mara. "You're set, Sergeant." "Thank you, General," she said, her voice low but firm. "Appreciate it." "Not a favor," he replied, correcting a mistake. That's when Lieutenant Calder approached, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like shame. He stopped a few feet away, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the floor. "Ma'am," he began, his voice quieter than it had been all morning. "I owe you an apology. For what I said earlier, I didn't know." Mara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't ask," she said, the words simple but sharp, cutting through his excuses like a blade through cloth. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." She didn't soften, didn't make it easy, but she didn't linger either. "We all learn sometime," she said after a moment. "Next time, ask first." "Yes, ma'am," he said again. And this time there was weight behind it. A promise to do better. General Elias Harlan gave Mara Kellen a final nod, the kind that carried more meaning than words could hold. He turned toward the depot's exit, his boots silent against the concrete, leaving behind a room still processing what had just unfolded. Mara stood, gathering her gear. New boots tucked under one arm, hydration pack slung over her shoulder, gloves stuffed into the bag. The weight of it felt familiar, grounding, like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She stepped toward the glass doors, the Louisiana sun blazing outside, turning the parking lot into a shimmering haze of heat and dust. The depot's buzz crept back, hesitant at first, like a machine rebooting after a power surge. Forklifts resumed their beeping, keyboards clacked, and the coffee machine by the entrance hissed its eternal complaint. But the energy had shifted. The lieutenants, Calder, Pratt, and Vesco, lingered near the vending machines, their earlier swagger replaced by a quiet unease. They didn't speak, didn't look at each other, each grappling with the realization that they'd misjudged something profound. The Master Sergeant Tolliver had already disappeared into the back, no doubt spreading word of what had happened. By nightfall, the story would ripple across Fort Dunmere, whispered in mess halls and barracks. The woman in the faded jacket, the ghost of a unit that didn't exist, the general who'd set things right. Mara pushed through the doors, the heat hitting her like a wall. The air smelled of hot asphalt and pine, with a faint undercurrent of motor oil from the nearby motor pool. Her truck sat baking in the lot, its blue paint dulled by years of sun and road dust. She tossed her gear into the back seat, windows already down to let the stifling air escape. As she moved toward the driver's side, she heard the crunch of gravel behind her. Harlan had fallen into step beside her, matching her pace without a word, like they were back in a patrol line in some forgotten corner of the world. They walked in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Two veterans moving through the morning heat, the depot and its lessons fading behind them. The bass pulsed with its usual rhythm, cadence calls echoing from a PT group, the growl of a Humvee engine starting up, the distant crackle of a radio. But for Mara and Harlan, it was just the crunch of their boots on gravel, the shimmer of heat rising from the ground, the shared understanding of what it meant to carry scars no one else could see. At the edge of the lot, near her truck, Harlan stopped. Mara stopped too. They stood there for a moment, the world around them reduced to the hum of cicadas and the faint creak of her truck's cooling engine. He didn't offer a grand speech or dredge up old war stories. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes carrying the kind of respect forged in places most people would never understand. Dust-choked ravines, nights lit only by muzzle flashes, decisions that left you counting the cost in silence. "You know," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the heat. "There's a joint exercise next month. Special Ops integration. Could use someone who knows how to run interference in a pinch." Mara adjusted the strap of her gear bag, considering his words. Her shoulder ached, an old wound stirred by the humidity and the weight of the morning. She glanced back toward the depot, where three young officers were likely rethinking every word they'd said. "Consulting?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. "Something like that," Harlan said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Might do them some good to work with someone who's been in the real thing." "Might," she agreed, her own voice carrying a hint of dry humor. She gave him a nod, small but deliberate, the kind that said she'd heard him, that she'd carry the offer with her. "I'll think on it, General." "Harlan," he corrected, his tone light but firm. "Just Harlan." She held his gaze for a moment, then turned toward her truck. The door creaked as she opened it, dust rising from the seat as she slid inside. Harlan stepped back, watching as she started the engine, the old Chevy rumbling to life with a cough of exhaust. She pulled away, tires kicking up gravel, the gear bag bouncing slightly in the back seat. No ceremony, no medals. Just the quiet restoration of something she'd never asked for but had earned 1,000 times over. As she drove past the motor pool, the base unfolded around her. Soldiers jogging in formation, a mechanic swearing at a stubborn bolt, the flag snapping in the breeze above the headquarters building. Mara didn't look back. The jacket on her shoulders, faded and frayed, felt right again. Its weight a reminder of what she'd carried and what she'd left behind. The road stretched ahead, cutting through the cypress trees, leading her back to a life that was hers alone. But the story wouldn't end here. By evening, Fort Dunmere would be alive with whispers. The woman in the worn coat. The patch that wasn't supposed to exist. The general who'd known exactly what it meant. And somewhere, in the back of their minds, 3 lieutenants would carry a lesson they'd never forget. Ask first. Have you ever seen someone face disrespect with quiet strength? Should the units that operated in the shadows get the recognition they deserve? Share your thoughts below. If this story resonated, hit subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. And if you know someone who values unsung courage, pass this story along. Until the next one.